middle class is, I'm talking about somebody who can afford to buy a car, who can afford to buy a house.
A person that's middle class is a person that is preserved, someone that's got a lot of desire and that's not afraid to go for what he wants.
What defines middle class? I think it's your mindset, the way you think.
It's someone who's not in the poor class, but not in the rich class.
Soweto, the best-known township in South Africa, covers 150 square kilometers on the southwestern outskirts of Johannesburg and is home to over 1 million black people. Johannesburg is the richest city in Africa, but the wealth is concentrated in the northern suburbs. During the apartheid years, only whites were allowed to reside in this part of town. Today, there are black people living here too. Apartheid barred black people from positions of power and enforced past laws that restricted their movements. They were excluded from well-paid jobs, and in townships like Soweto, living conditions were poor and there was little or no infrastructure. The 1976 uprising was the most memorable event in Soweto's history. Thousands of protesting school students were confronted by armed police, and hundreds were shot and killed. In the 1980s, when the struggle intensified, it was often fought by and in the name of the working class. Change finally became possible with the release of Nelson Mandela, a resident of Soweto. In 1994, he became South Africa's first democratically elected president. The abolition of apartheid provided new opportunities. A small elite was integrated into the corporate world, and a large number moved from low-paid, low-status jobs into better positions. Investment was pumped into Soweto. In the last decades, roads have been tarred, water and electricity systems have been upgraded, parks have been greened, there are new restaurants, clubs, businesses, museums, and shopping malls. Soweto even boasts a FIFA-recognized multi-million rand soccer stadium, which was constructed especially for the 2010 World Cup. But these improvements conceal the distressing reality of poverty, which is intense and widespread. Shack settlements lacking sewage and decent water blight the landscape. Unemployment has increased and inequality amongst black people is much greater. As a racial divide began to dissolve, distinction between rich and poor became more stark. Taking all this into consideration, what is the status of class in Soweto?
My name is Mosa Phadi. I'm a researcher with the University-of-Johannesburg Center for Sociological Research. For 3 years now, my colleagues and I have been investigating class identities and class structure in Soweto. In a large representative survey of adults living in Soweto, we found a phenomena that 66% of Sowetans consider themselves as middle class. Given the poverty that exists in Soweto, this percentage was surprising. Moreover, the way I understood middle class was linked to teachers, nurses, and those who own businesses. And there are few such people who live in Soweto. Why then do so many people consider themselves as middle class?
In order to gain some insight into this phenomenon, we carefully selected 5 candidates out of thousands who partook in the survey to represent the differences in the lifestyle of Sowetans. Perhaps, by speaking to these people, we can gain some insight into the class status in Soweto.
Hi, my name is Nkateko Bekwa. I'm 29 years old. I live here in Diepkloof Extension with my mother and my younger brother. My mother owns this house. I studied graphic design for 3 years and I'm qualified as a graphic designer. I design from your corporate identities, websites, brochures and all other marketing material.
So what class do you consider yourself?
I consider myself middle class.
My name is Sabelo Lukele. I'm 37 years old. I live in Pimville, Zone 9. I am the owner of the house. I'm living with my friend. I matriculated at Rustenburg at the school called Tswaidi High School in 1995, and I come to Johannesburg, and now I'm working at the Johannesburg Art Gallery as a freelancer, as a tourist guide. I'm welcoming visitors, taking the tourists around. We'll also inform them when they come. I'll take them around, telling them about the works of art, interpreting them, the ideas, the techniques, the style, why this person made this painting and all those type of things.
So what class do you consider yourself?
I consider myself as a middle class.
My name is Charles Malloy and I'm 57 years old. I live here in this house. This house was my mother's house for past decade. I stay with my nephews here. So my nephews are not working, all of them. Everything depends on me. But I take it as a man. I started to go to school at Orlando West, and then I left school at Gitao Primary School at Standard 5. I couldn't hardly complete the Standard 5. I fix fridges right now. Anything, stoves, fridge, kettles, you can bring anything, I can do it. I can say that I'm blessed because I can cope with anything.
So what class do you consider yourself?
I'm in the middle class.
My name is Andronica. I'm 48 years old. I'm staying Christian Squatter Camp. I live with my husband and my one child and my grandchild. The owner of the house is me and my husband. My husband, she find a job. Maybe after 2 years, she stay at home. She can't get the job. Now she get this piece job from last year, October. It is not easy to find a job if there's somebody she mustn't come to you. Now I'm not working.
So what class do you consider yourself?
I'm the middle class.
My name is Mpho Hilda Makene. I'm 74 years old. I live in Diepkloof Extension, Phase 3, and this is my house. I have 3 bedrooms, of which the main bedroom is an ensuite. I have an expensive taste when it comes to furniture. I have special places where I buy my furniture. My lounge suite, I bought it from Winston Sut, and it was specially ordered for me. I own 2 schools. One is training 6 months healthcare worker, and the other one is training a 2-year program known as enrolled nursing, registered with the South African Nursing Council. As a result, I'm the principal of the school and a manager as well.
So what class do you consider yourself?
I consider myself to be a middle class.
So all 5 of these people consider themselves as middle class? I thought I'll find out about the survey from 2 of my colleagues, Claire Charuti and Peter Alexander.
Yes, there are all sorts of different ways in which you can divide people up with a survey of this kind. Our initial interest was in organisation or potential to organise on the basis of occupation, sometimes lack of ability to organise in certain kinds of occupational categories. And I can give you some figures to indicate what proportion of the population of Soweto fits within each of these 8 categories. So that top category, the bourgeoisie, is only 0.1% of the population in Soweto. Almost no capitalists living in Soweto. And as for the professional middle class, they're also tiny in number, only 1%. 1 in 100 people in Soweto are part of that reasonably well-off professional grouping. Students quite high, surprisingly, about 12%. So it's quite interesting that students come next, because it reflects something we've discovered at our university, which is that they tend to be a bit better off than most other people living in the townships. That's not to say that's the case always. We're dealing with averages here. But the students came third. The petty bourgeoisie, the shopkeepers and so on, only 5.7%. The employed workers, 23.7%. So about a quarter of the population are employed on a more or less regular basis as workers. The pensioners and others, 10.2%, about 1 in 10 of the population in Soweto. The unemployed, 25.5%. So the unemployed, more numerous than the employed workers, about a quarter of the population. But then there's this category, the underemployed, and we found these people to be 21.7% of the population. And although this is quite a diverse category of people, overall, they tend to be worse off than the unemployed. And there's a formulation which people use in India to capture this experience. And they say that the poor are too poor to be unemployed. In other words, these are survivalists, people who do anything they can in order that they've got some food upon which they can survive.
Well, certainly people use the word class quite freely to talk about the kinds of differences and divisions that they might see around them and in the township. What people mean by class when they're using it was actually one of the things that we set out to research, is to see whether their definitions of class have anything to do with sociologists' definitions.
There's a lot of poverty in Soweto, and I think if you're a tourist or if you're coming to Soweto for the first time, you don't notice this. You see lots of new building projects, and it seems that this is a very dynamic part of South African society. But if you look a bit more carefully, if you go into people's houses, if you go into some of the shack settlements away from the tourist gaze, you find an enormous amount of poverty.
One of the most surprising findings for us, though, was that 66% of people in Soweto were talking about themselves as middle class, or willing to accept this label that they were middle class. But also it raised the question that if middle class is just about affordability, which is how people talked about it in our very first round of interviews, then how is it that this unemployed group without any source of income is coming to think of themselves as middle class?
What's interesting is that this identification with the middle class is very strong amongst the unemployed and even amongst the underemployed.
For us, this raised a whole question about what exactly is it that makes such divergent people adopt the same label for themselves.